Hey, Peter, how about a little bit of ship banter?
Well, hello, Dan. What a great idea.
Awesome. How about we
All
make
right,
it a
very cool.
podcast?
Yes, welcome. This is our launch version of A Little Bit of Ship Banter, a podcast featuring myself, Peter Knego, cruise journalist and maritime historian, and my dear friend Dan Trachtenberg, who is great with all things to do with social media and putting things like this together, and just a wonderful co-host who has his own podcast, Shelter Cats. And anyway, Dan, thank you for talking me into this, and I hope our audience is grateful for you to you for that as well. I am a maritime historian who began in about 1972 when I was assigned a paper on the Lusitania, thinking it was a battleship and learning it was a four-funneled Edwardian ocean liner that sank by the bow with the loss of tremendous life only 3 years after the Titanic, and that spurred my interest in ocean liners. Poseidon Adventure came out that same year, and a beautiful book by John Maxstone Graham called The Only Way to Cross about the rise and fall of the beautiful Atlantic liners. I was born in Los Angeles, raised by a beautiful fashion model mother who was a gift to me in every possible way and who encouraged all of my interests and drove me down to bloody LA Harbor more times than I can count when she was so tired and supporting a family, but she wanted to keep her little persistent son happy. And my father, who was, by the time I was grown up and out of work, actor who had a very interesting life and career. And even though he wasn't necessarily the best father in the world, he did become a good friend, and we shared a mutual interest in ships. So I offer many thanks to both of them for encouraging me into this lifelong hobby and passion of mine. What I am working on now very strongly is my YouTube channel, Midship Cinema, which features video that I've shot over the past 30 years of classic ships that no longer exist and current cruise ships that do exist, and people want to know what they're really like. And I offer true expertise, not tooting my horn, but after 30 some odd 40 years of doing this, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to ships. I've been on over 300 cruises. I've taken literally a million photos. I've visited thousands of ships, and I love to share that information on my YouTube channel. So I am far from your typical influencer. I also have a website, Midship Century versus Midship Cinema, which is the YouTube channel. The website is dedicated to fittings and fixtures that I've rescued from classic ocean liners and cruise ships that were scrapped in India over the past 20 years. I've written hundreds and hundreds of articles. I haven't written a book yet because they're too time consuming and they just don't pay, and nobody reads books anymore, but I will probably do that. But right now, I like to focus on the videos because I really enjoy making those. So, anyway, that's a little bit about me. And Dan, tell us about you and how you got into all of this.
Sure. Well, right now I'm the host of the Shelter Cats podcast, which is not about ships. But as a kid, my two favorite ships were the Titanic, don't roll your eyes, and
Mm.
the Pacific Princess. When I was a kid, I had my parents' black and white TV that only worked on Channel 7, which was ABC, where I grew up in Brooklyn. So every Saturday night, I begged my parents to let me stay up to watch The Love Boat, which was one of my favorite shows as a kid. And for me, it was more the ship and the places the ship went, as opposed to the romance and the up and coming stars and has been stars that kind of mixed on the show. So as a kid, those are my two favorite ships. I love those ships. And as I got older and the internet came about, and I had this ability to kind of research ships, I learned that there were a lot more ships other than those two. And I just started learning about all these ships. And one of my first jobs out of college was at the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, New York, where I got to archive a lot of old PR files and brochures and deck plans, which are like maps of the specific decks of ships, for those of you not initiated. And that was around 1999. And around that time, you and I became friends because one of the first major websites was your previous website, Maritime Matters, where you wrote a lot of great articles that had your pictures and your photos and your videos, and you used to sell your VHS tapes of the cruise ships being scrapped. And I thought, who is this Peter dude? How do I become someone like him? You just seem to live this fascinating life where you got to see all these ships, and I'm this kid in Brooklyn just reading about it and and trying to buy all these old ocean liner brochures. And we became friends because I was looking for a specific deck plan for a specific ship called the I'm going to always pronounce ship names wrong, and Peter will always pronounce them correctly. So you'll get used to that as the podcast progresses. I say Italis, you say Italis. Am I right?
Italis,
There
yes,
we
yeah.
go.
Like
You
Italy, but Italis,
you
yeah,
make it sound so musical. I was particularly fascinated with this one ship in this one year, and the no information was available. So I emailed you, and you were very gracious in making me a color Xerox copy of the deck plan and the brochure that you had, and you sent it to me folded as if it was an actual deck plan. And I still have that as one of my prized possessions. Uh, so my interest in ships led me to work for the SS United States Foundation, which we'll talk about the SS United States shortly.
yeah,
And it kind of ballooned from there. So I've had a lifelong passion for ships and history, particularly the ocean liners, the Atlantic ocean liners, some of the Trans-Pacific ocean liners, which we'll discuss. But it just my interest in it was that I liked that period of time, 30s, 40s, 50s, 20, 1920s. Just I tried to lose myself in that era of, how people acted, how people dressed, and it just was so different than cruises now, which is, going down water slides
yeah,
and having all these activities and having all this stuff to do and this constant like activity and being surrounded by thousands of people. So I was
yeah,
always fascinated by that kind of slower, more relaxed. You had 5 days, nothing to do. You made your time your own. So that's kind of been my interest. And in the
yeah,
past few years, I've been helping you with the social media for the Midship
thank
Cinema
you.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And link will be in the description, by the way. And now we'll have a podcast where we'll get to discuss ships past, present, and future, and perhaps a mix of a little politics and a little music and a little pop culture as well. So
How
here
can
we
you
are.
not have those? These
They
days, if you care about anything that's going on. And I do want to say one thing about Maritime Matters because it was actually created by Martin Cox, who was born in Southampton. And he was growing up watching these beautiful P&O liners sail off on their voyages to Australia. And halfway to Australia, they would stop in California. So I was documenting some of the very same ships he was watching sail out of Southampton on the exact same voyages, and we became good friends. He started this website. I was completely clueless about anything to do with digital anything, and Martin was like, just do your writing and do your photographs and send them to me and I'll post them for you. And he did. And Maritime Matters was one of the first and most successful of all the websites about ships and cruising in the very beginning. And I was blogging before I even knew, well, there was no term blog at the time. And then I came to Martin one day and I said, I'm supposed to be blogging, Martin. I don't know what that is. And he says, oh, dear, you've been doing it for years. So I'm like, okay,
That's
good to
true.
know. So anyway, I am just so clueless with all things digital, and to have people like Martin and now you in my life, sort of embracing that aspect of things and trying to get the word out about the things that I'm doing and that are happening, which are important to me, means all the world. So thank you for that, Dan, and thank you for all the work you do on the social media. I'm actually starting to enjoy Instagram now because you can make videos, and that really is my passion. I've been posting photos and describing them for decades, and videos are just more challenging. I love the audio aspect, adding music, doing narration, and all of those bits. So it's just a lot more fun. But you really help get the word out for me, and you're just so kind and dedicated to it, and I'm just very grateful for that. So,
Of course. You have
well,
fascinating stories, and that's what how this podcast will be a companion to everything you do.
well,
Because
let's
your
hope people.
narration and your stories hopefully will get to more people. Because I think these
Thank you.
stories should be heard by people who podcast. So here we are.
And that's the one thing I am proud of about the channel, the YouTube channel Midship Cinema, is that I am speaking from experience with these ships. I walk their decks, I photograph them, I videotape them. I had life-changing travel experiences, social experiences on board these ships. So I'm not recreating them in AI and talking about an era that I never saw. I was part of all of this, and I watched these beautiful ships go off to the scrappers or meet untimely fates. And so I felt it was my duty to record them, and I'm really happy I did. So that's part of the pleasure I get out of doing this is that when I'm talking about the Canberra or the Italis, which I visited when she was called Alfredos, but that ship is so important to both of us because she was originally the SS America. And I think even though the United States was a magnificent ship and much bigger and much faster, the America was more beautiful and more human sized and warmer. And I think people who sailed on both ships, more people tend to have fonder memories of the America, even though they might have been impressed by the technology of the United States. So, anyway, thank you again. And speaking of the United States, as
Good segue.
yeah, well, for anybody who hasn't been aware, she was towed away from Philadelphia in January to Mobile, Alabama, after the Conservancy had to give up their hold on the ship. They had no choice. They were being forced out of that pier because the rent had been raised drastically and they could no longer afford it. All the plans that everyone had come up with, whether bringing the ship back to cruising, which really wasn't feasible, but there were some excellent, beautiful plans about turning her into a land-based attraction and hotel. Hopefully, in New York, that would have been ideal to see that ship back in New York painted in her original colors. But unfortunately, none of that came to pass. And so they had to let it go. She's sitting in Mobile, being stripped of whatever was left on her that could be considered toxic so that they can sink her. I believe they're aiming for November of this year to sink her off the coast of Florida as a diving attraction, which is horrifying to any of us who appreciated what that ship still is and once was. But I guess it's better than scrapping. And part of that process, I believe within the next couple of weeks, her funnels and mast are going to have to come down so that when they sink her, she won't be a hazard to navigation. So when they take those gorgeous sampan funnels, which were among the biggest ever put on any ship with the big red, white, and blue markings and those magnificent fins and their simplicity but elegance of design were really part of the profile of that ship. And when they take those off, I think that's going to hurt a lot for people who appreciated what she was. It's just a very bad year for people who like classic cruise ships. Another great survivor was the MV Stockholm, which was built in 1948, the ship that collided with and sank the Andrea Doria in 1956. And there's plenty of blame to go to both sides. But those of you who call her death ship, please get a life. The ship did not drive herself into the Andrea Doria. humans did that on both ships. And that's how the collision happened. And it was a tragedy. 51 people died. Andrea Doria, one of the most beautiful ships ever built, sank. And the Stockholm, with a smashed in bow, limped back to New York, where she had a new bow installed. And then she went on to a career sailing as an East German cruise ship for 25 years, known mainly for her defections of both crew and passengers. She would sail to Cuba, and there were times when passengers and crew would jump off and try to swim to the Florida
Wow.
Keys or other locations to escape the Iron Curtain. And then instead of getting scrapped, she went on to become a refugee ship in Oslo for a few years, and then was bought by the Italians, taken back to Italy, and converted near the yard where the Andrea Doria was built into a beautiful Italian cruise ship. And I had the privilege of visiting her when she had just come out of the rebuilding process, and her captain was Gerardo de Rosa, who was the captain of the Achille Lauro when she was hijacked. A man with wonderful stories. And anyway, that ship last sailed as Astoria after many name changes. I sailed in her twice. I had the privilege of lecturing about the Andrea Doria on board the former Stockholm, within feet of the Stockholm's dented bell that was rescued from the wreckage and loaned to the ship by the anonymous owner while she was operating as Astoria. So it was very sad. She was towed off from Rotterdam after 5 years of being laid up and not maintained to a scrapyard in Belgium. And I just posted a YouTube video shot by a friend of mine who wishes to remain anonymous, but he captured her off the coast of Flushing in Holland when she was in the North Sea or Atlantic Ocean, basically for the final time, with just magnificent footage of her sailing by. So that's the latest video on the Midship Cinema YouTube channel. So rough year all around. The beautiful Aurora, a German-built passenger ship from 1955, had many incarnations, was purchased on Craigslist, and was in the news many times recently because her owner was restoring her, a man who bought the ship really for a song and a dance, basically on Craigslist, and spent almost 2 decades restoring the ship. But sadly, there were a lot of issues, too many to get into, and he had to sell the ship. And she sadly sank at her moorings and then was towed off and scrapped under a great veil of secrecy. And I, who live in California, made a couple trips up north to the scrapyard and literally had to sneak in to document her. And that again is also on YouTube. It's called The Nine Lives of the Aurora, a very fascinating ship. So we lost her. We're on the verge of possibly losing the beautiful Delta Queen, the riverboat built in 1927 that was brought back to life on the Mississippi and had a huge following. And sadly, she just was left to decay and over the years. And now the people who have been trying to save her are offering her for sale to anyone who will take her because they can no longer afford to do that. So she's near New Orleans, and I'm hoping to be able to visit her one more time. So it's very sad if you like the classic ships, and we will have new ever larger cruise ships in our future, carrying more and more people, doing more and more naughty things, and being more and more chaotic. While there are the smaller ships, but unfortunately, the smaller ships you really have to have a big budget for. You can't just hop on, if you don't have much money and go on a lovely cruise on a small ship anymore. All the major cruise lines are operating giant behemoths, and they're full of all sorts of people. Many of them, most of them are wonderful people, but there are some bad apples in the lot, long lines and chaos and lots of kids and noise. And that's kind of what cruising is about now. If you can't go to the alternate smaller lines or take river cruises or expedition cruises.
It definitely, there are very, very few Queen Mary, the QE2 are basically it. Are those the
Yeah.
only two classic liners left that I'm aware of?
Well, don't forget the Rotterdam,
And the
because
Rotterdam.
Rotterdam is far more welcoming and more beautifully preserved. And the great thing about Rotterdam, unlike the Queen Mary, which is in Long Beach, British built ocean liner with British heritage. QE2, British built ocean liner with British heritage, sitting in Dubai where nobody can find her or nobody cares. And the ship is virtually empty and pretty much abandoned. Rotterdam is in her home port. And there is another very important ship, the Hikawa Maru, which is in Yokohama. And you can't stay on her, but she's a museum ship, and she's the only surviving Japanese ocean liner built before World War II. And the Japanese had an incredible fleet of ships that were sadly all lost in the war. So you can visit Hikawa Maru, and she's an Art Deco masterpiece built in 1930. But the pickings are slim and far between. There's a Great Lakes ship called the Keewatin, which I was just on board in Kingston, Ontario. She was built in 1907 in Scotland and brought to the Great Lakes. They literally had to cut her in half and rebuild her after they got her through into the lakes. And she sailed with the twin sister, the Assiniboia, which burned and was scrapped in the late 60s. And Keewatin was sold for scrap, but she was stuck in ice that winter when Canadian Pacific, her last owners, decided to sell the ship. And while she was stuck in ice and couldn't be towed to the scrapyard, there was a man in Michigan who read about this in a book called Farewell to Steam. And he bought the Keewatin with his own money and had her towed to Douglas, Michigan, which is near this resort town of Saugatuck, and turned her into a floating museum there for decades. And then, he got older and his family wanted to get rid of the ship. And so now she's back in her home waters of Canada. But if you like the Lusitania, if you like the Titanic, ships of that era, this is the best living example of an Edwardian ocean liner. You just have to go to Kingston, Ontario, which is a lovely place, and you can drive there from New York, by the way. And it's a great town, and I recommend going there for a couple days and spending as much time as you can on the Keewatin. So,
You
yeah,
can't stay aboard the Keewatin, am I correct?
Keewatin, yes.
Keewatin.
Yeah. I always wanted to pronounce it Keewatin, but it's Keewatin. It's a Cree Indian name, which I believe means wind of the north on the Great Lakes, because that's the huge wind that would come in and stir up the lakes. There's a whole culture to Great Lakes shipping that I was, as an Atlantic and Pacific liner aficionado, very unaware of until a dear friend of mine who happened to be one of the DJs I used to call when I was in the music industry said, "You got to come out to the Great Lakes. You got to let me take you around." And he did. And I learned so much about those ships. They're on a smaller scale, but the Great Lakes is like its own world. And there are so many great museums that are cargo ships, most of them, but they're beautifully built and they're, from the teens and 20s, and they're preserved, and people can go on them and tour them and see what life was like on these ships in several places around the Great Lakes. I'll do a video about all of those as well. I've got a long list of, of videos that I have to create, unfortunately. Uh,
Once again, in the podcast description, we'll have links to the Midship Cinema YouTube channel and Midship Century website and all of our social media. Last, but certainly not least, we are recording this in mid-July of 2025,
yeah.
and we're not going to be really a political podcast, but I know you wanted to touch on some. It would seem that politics and the cruise ship industry are mixing in a
Yes.
very unfortunate way. So
Yeah.
in the last few minutes, I know you wanted to touch on that
Thank
because I
you,
know you
Dan.
were just reporting about that. So
Yeah.
what's
This
going
just
on?
came to me last night. I was contacted by someone directly involved on the Great Lakes. There are two main cruise lines that cater to Americans. There's Viking, with their two expedition, very ultra modern, really advanced, gorgeously designed expedition ships. And there's Victory Cruise Lines, a operator that has two sort of replica old steamships that operate in a very different way. They're very small, human scale. They only carry just over 100 guests each. And right now, because they have an international crew, their crew members have been detained by Customs and Border Patrol in Detroit, and they are being accused. From what I understand, the cruise lines have to provide a list of all crew members in advance when they get to the U.S. shores on these Great Lakes cruises, which sail between Canada and the U.S. And they go over these lists and they do these random uh, internet searches, and they accuse these people who have no recourse. They cannot defend themselves. They cannot hire lawyers. They have no rights. And they're not here as citizens or trying to be here to live and work. They're working on the ships. So they're taking these people literally off the ships, and the crew on board the Victory ships are mostly from the Philippines. They're accusing them of child molestation and watching child porn sites. Now, maybe they'll find one or two that actually do this, but in the meantime, one of the crew members that they arrested was arrested for a 2008 photo that he posted of his baby son in a wash basin who had just been born, and he was a proud father showing a picture of his own child. So even though he pointed that out to them, he was taken away, detained, and deported. And that's what's happening to these people. And the ones who are not being deported are friends with those who are, and their morale is low. Victory has a limited amount of crew on their ships, and if they're going to be taken away, or if the crew members are going to decide that they don't want to be arrested falsely and leave on their own behalf, they're going to not be able to operate these ships. This is going to hurt the economy. It's going to hurt this upstart cruise line, which is offering great product. I think Viking is also involved, although I haven't heard anything specifically or directly from the ships. I do understand that several of their crew members from the Viking Polaris and Viking Octantis have also been detained and deported. So that's an issue that has to be dealt with, because if they can do it to those small ships, they can easily go to the big ships, Carnival and Royal Caribbean, NCL, all of the big carriers with thousands of crew members. And if they're going to make the crew fearful or want to leave, that's going to have a big impact on the cruise industry, which is, aside from the industry, what it's doing to these innocent people. So I think this goes beyond politics. This is about humanity and morality, and it's very sad. And we're getting information as it's coming out, and I will keep posting things on Instagram and Facebook as I learn more. But this is just starting to come out, and they came to me, and I've been sharing it with my colleagues in the hopes that there will be more care taken to not deport innocent, hardworking, dedicated people and create fear that doesn't need to be out there right now. There's enough bad stuff happening.
And
So yeah.
one thing, as part of helping you, I watch a lot of the travel YouTube universe. I get sucked into the vortex a lot. One thing universally that Peter and I have our opinions about travel YouTube, but one thing
Mm,
universally that every YouTube channel praises is how hardworking these crew are
yeah.
across the board, even on ships with 7,000 people down to the Victory with 100 passengers. Across the board, everybody says how hardworking, how dedicated, even when they're overwhelmed, they work their tails off. So to add fear to everything that they're dealing with, it's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
So
It takes the morale down for all the rest of the crew. And of course, that feeds over to the guests and passengers, because
they pick
your
up on it.
barista is going to be very sad if her boyfriend or husband has been deported. Your Your waiters are going to be mourning the loss of their friends and family. These are people who are doing jobs that most Americans either cannot do because they just can't be bothered or they don't want to
They
do.
don't want
And
to
they're
do, right?
providing a service and enabling we, as the privileged public, to take these wonderful vacations and be waited on, by hardworking people who are committed to their jobs. It's just a shame. Of course, they're now concerned about what it's doing to farm labor and other aspects of the hospitality industry, people who work in hotels. So they're trying to be a little more careful, I guess. But this is having a much broader effect on our economy and on all sorts of parts of human life than I think was intended by the people who voted for this. So anyway, it's important that word gets out and that this be stemmed or at least recoursed so that they're not harming innocent people. Sure, we don't want child molesters, okay? Nobody wants them around, but you cannot just randomly select people and go over their internet history without exactly looking at what's there and what they have done and how they may or may not have participated. It's just random, it's reckless, and it's very destructive. So, yeah, thank you, Dan.
Of
And
course. So this has been a little bit of ship banter. Our first episode. We'll have more episodes. We'll have guests. We'll be covering so many topics on the classic ocean liners, our personal histories. Uh, we'll have guests with their personal histories, maybe some ocean liner collectors, hint, hint, and we'll tie it into that wonderful collection of videos that you have, which are very unique and cover an aspect of these histories that I think are very unique and very special. You follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, on the web, and on Instagram. We'll have links to everything in the podcast description. And this has been a little bit of ship banter, a midship cinema podcast. Thank you, Peter, so much.
Dan, thank you so much. Looking forward to many more shows with you.
See you in the next episode.